Hey guys, tonight we're sinking into stone corridors, dusty royal chambers, and the obsessive mind of a man who ruled the world by day and read himself to sleep by night. You're in Nineveh, capital of the Assyrian Empire, where King Ashurbanipal, the guy who once described himself as king of the universe, builds not just cities, but a vast library, unlike anything the world has ever seen. You're standing in his sandals now, probably sleep-deprived, mildly bloodstained from that lion you stabbed earlier, and surrounded by hundreds of thousands of clay tablets. The smell of baked earth oil lamps and very old ambition hangs in the air, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and if you're listening from somewhere far-flung and fascinating, drop your location and local time in the comments. It always makes my night down now. Dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You sit at the edge of a cool stone bench, the weight of your palace robe heavy across your shoulders. Outside, the guards still shift on their feet, spears clinking faintly in the night air. But in here, in your private sanctuary of knowledge, you're king in a different way. Not the kind who swings swords or conquers lands, but the kind who collects wisdom like others collect heads, or wives, or bronze chariots. You've got those too, of course. But this is your true obsession. Ashurbanipal, you were the last great king of Assyria. And your idea of fun wasn't exactly clubbing or falconry. No, you were a reader. A reader. Historians still argue whether you were the first literate Assyrian king, or just had very convincing scribes, but you said you could read and write in Sumerian and Akkadian, and honestly, who's going to call your bluff when your other hobby is lion slaying? You didn't just read for fun though. You read to dominate. Knowledge was power, and you were greedy for it. Your empire stretched from Egypt to Elam, and every city had scrolls, tablets, and secrets. So, naturally, you ordered your minions as royal messengers to go fetch it all. A letter to the governor of Babylonia might have gone something like, "Please send copies of every religious, medical, and astronomical tablet in your archives, or else I will send troops and also be quite miffed." And they did, reluctantly, perhaps. Some sent the originals instead of copies. Others sent boring texts hoping you'd lose interest. Spoiler, you didn't. Over years, a torrent of tablets flooded into Nineveh. You had the best minds in Mesopotamia scouring cities, temples, and old royal libraries. If someone somewhere once scribbled a spell to cure migraines or summon rain, you wanted it. Picture the logistics. Wagons rumbling over dusty roads, filled not with gold, but crates of baked clay rectangles etched with millennial wisdom. In your study, tablets stack in tottering towers, sorted by genre, omens, rituals, king lists, star charts, recipes, and something that suspiciously looks like an Assyrian version of relationship advice. Each one is a whisper from the past. And you listen by torchlight. You roll another scroll well, unroll another tablet. These weren't bound books yet. Each tablet is held in your calloused hand, the cuneiform sharp against your fingertips. You squint. It's in Old Babylonian. Of course it is. But you've trained for this. The symbols blur as sleep edges in. You blink hard. Not yet. A quick Side note, you probably won't survive this. I mean, statistically speaking, most people didn't survive much of anything back then. Between plagues, palace coups, and a diet of mostly barley and dates, you were kind of living on borrowed time. But if you were going to go out, it might as well be surrounded by literature. What kind of king builds a library before a new temple? You. Your court advisors raised eyebrows, but you knew the truth. Empires fall, but writing lasts. Probably not the recipe for sheep stew, but definitely your war records. Definitely the epic about Gilgamesh. You kept rereading even though the ending bummed you out every time. At some point, maybe around tablet 73, you lean back. A carved relief stares at you from the wall. Your own face, victorious, holding a lion by the beard. Very humble. The flicker of torchlight makes it wink at you. Or maybe that's just the sleep deprivation. One of your scribes shuffles in. His robe is smudged with ink, and his hands are shaking slightly. Another batch of translated texts. You gesture, he bows. Leaves. You won't thank him. You're the king. Not a guidance counselor, but you're pleased. You'll read them tomorrow. Or maybe right now. Sleep is for people with less impressive libraries. You pick up another tablet. It's from Sipper, a hymn to the goddess Ishtar, full of poetic metaphors and very awkward flirtation. Still, you hum a few lines aloud. It's kind of catchy. You wonder if the goddess appreciates her fan mail. Then you chuckle because, you know, tomorrow's docket includes a lion hunt and a debate about whether Venus retrograde means war with the Medes. Back in the modern world. We now know that Ashurbanipal's library, your library, was one of the earliest and most extensive in history. Over 30,000 tablets have been found, many shockingly intact. Fires from later invasions baked the clay even harder, accidentally preserving them. It's like your obsession with record-keeping got cosmic backup. So, as you stretch out on the stone bench, palace walls humming with silence, you feel the quiet weight of immortality settle on your chest. Not the kind built by swords, but by stories, by language, by dusty little clay bricks that future generations will dig up and mispronounce your name from. You close your eyes. Another scribe approaches. Another batch of tablets. Another reason not to sleep. You wake before dawn. Or maybe you never truly slept. The stone beneath you is still cool, and your royal robe now bears the unmistakable crease of someone who nodded off mid. No shame. Kings are allowed to pass out with epics in their lap. Stretching your arms, you shuffle into the corridor that leads to the lions. Yes, the real lions. Because what's a well-read king without a bit of drama? The great court of Assyria doesn't just run on scrolls and scribes. It runs on power displays. And your favorite performance, the royal lion hunt. See, in your empire, you don't just build a library, you earn it. And nothing screams I deserve a palace of knowledge like personally stabbing a lion in the face. It's tradition that your attendants are already waiting, garbed in ceremonial linen, sweating slightly even in the early morning chill. They don't look at you. They don't speak. They know this isn't just about entertainment. This is sacred, symbolic, terrifying. The king doesn't hunt lions because he needs meat or pelts. He hunts them because the lion is chaos, and the king must master chaos. No pressure. You step into the arena beat, 'cause of course there's an arena. Specially built, stone-walled with decorative trees and painted skies to simulate the wild, even though the actual wild has been paved over by your empire. You grip your bow, take a breath, and the gates creak open. Out it comes. The lion is huge, battered, probably drugged, honestly. You can see the matting of its mane, the twitch of its ears. It's been kept hungry, primed for spectacle. But there's still enough fury in those eyes to make your heart skip a beat. You're the king, the most powerful man alive. But in this moment, it's just you, a bow, and several hundred spectators betting quietly on whether your aim is better than last week's. Your first arrow flies. It grazes the shoulder. The lion roars, stumbles. Everyone tenses. Second arrow, a hit. Not fatal. You drop the bow, draw your spear, because of course there's a spear. You advance slowly, one calculated step at a time. This is ritual now. You must face the beast up close. You must show the gods, the nobles, and the scribes, who'll later chisel this into stone reliefs, that you are not just a scholar, you are divine will in motion. The lion lunges, you thrust, it collapses, and there's silence, just your breath. The shuffle of sandals behind you. The faint crackle of a torch. You wipe your brow and nod, as if to say, "Bring me my stylus." Because now that you've danced with death, it's time to return to something truly dangerous. Sedating. The irony isn't lost on you. You kill lions by morning, read epic poetry by afternoon, and collect spells by moonlight. You're a one-man empire of contradictions. Scholars will later debate whether this ritual was really about bravery or just propaganda, whether these hunts were staged, the lions bred in captivity. Historians still argue whether you ever even missed a shot, or if that part was helpfully edited out by your PR department. But what's not debated is this. Your lion hunts were carved into palace walls. And those carvings, they're stunning. Not just here's a lion, here's a king stunning, but emotionally raw. You ordered your artists to show the agony in the lion's face. The blood, the panic, the moment before death. Because even in conquest, you demanded truth. Or at least the illusion of it. You stroll past one such relief, notched into alabaster. Massive, lifelike. There you are, frozen mid-strike, muscles taut, jaw set. The lion writhes, arrow protruding eyes. Wide, it's beautiful. And horrific. And you love it. Not because you're cruel though, let's be honest. You have your moments, but because these images speak, just like your tablets. Just like the poetry of Enheduanna, or the laments of Sumer. Art, for you, is part of the archive. You don't just collect words, you collect feeling. Battle, fear, triumph. It all goes into the record. Back in the library, your head still smells faintly of lion blood. You sit, drink watered wine, and thumb through tablets on divination. You wonder what the stars have to say about this morning's display. You pull a clay slab toward you. It's a lion entrail reading chart. Of course you have one of those. Modern scholars find this part fascinating. Your empire believed that the gods communicated through liver spots. Yes, really. You'd sacrifice a sheep, examine its liver, and decide whether or not to invade a city. Some of your most important political decisions came from organs. There's a tablet describing what it means when the gallbladder is missing. Short answer: bad news. You leaf through more examples, each one carefully labeled, preserved, baked. Your library didn't just house literature. It was an intelligence agency. Every omen, every hunt, every liver reading added to the master plan, and that plan, eternal dominion. Of course, not everyone appreciated your multitasking. Some enemies whispered that a king who read too much might grow soft, that a true warrior didn't need libraries. But you had already proven them wrong on the battlefield, in the arena, and here. Surrounded by 30,000 clay reminders of your brilliance, you look down at a new tablet. This one's a list of conquered kings. You smile. Every name scratched into this tablet is a memory, a kingdom brought to heel, a source of books acquired. For you, knowledge and war were never separate things. You didn't conquer cities just to rule them. You conquered them to read them. Your lion still lies cooling in the arena. Servants will drag it out, offer it in tribute to the goddess, and hang its pelt as a reminder. But you already see the next task. A scroll from Elam has arrived. Something about herbal remedies and dream interpretation. You're intrigued because while most kings sleep off the adrenaline of battle, you stay up reading about whether drinking snake milk will cure insomnia. Spoiler, it doesn't. The sun reaches its lazy climb over the rooftops of Nineveh, gilding the palace walls in pale gold. But you, naturally, are already deep within the heart of your true domain. Not the throne room, but the library. This part of the palace is cool, windowless, and quietly alive with the sound of reed pens scratching wet clay. You step over a crumbling mat made of woven palm fibers someone tried to decorate. Bless their heart, and you inhale deeply. Dust, oil lamps, dry clay. The scent of memory. You're back among your treasures. A forest of stone shelves, groaning with thousands of tablets. Every wall, every corridor here is built not for comfort, but for preservation. Thick stone blocks guard against fire. Narrow walkways keep the air cool. You glide past columns carved with winged bulls, into a chamber where the cuneiform never sleeps. You pause by the archive of epics. There's the Epic of Gilgamesh, of course your personal favorite, though the ending still annoys you. Gilgamesh wanders the world in search of immortality and ends up with personal growth. Boo, but you've read it so many times, you've started to imagine the characters walking the halls with you. Sometimes you even argue with them. It's fine. You're the king. Next, you pass a shelf devoted to omens. Hundreds of tablets line the stone, each with tiny, perfect wedges, so delicate, you could believe they were carved by ants with attitude. There's an entire wall labeled, "If a man dreams of goats, and his teeth fall out, then ... And yes, there are multiple interpretations. You grin. The ancients had opinions, and you collect them all. Modern archaeologists are still in awe of this setup. See, your library wasn't just a messy pile of stuff. Oh, no. You had a system. Categories, labels, sometimes even colophons, little lines at the end of a tablet, saying things like, "End of chapter 2, or copied from the original, in Babylon." Historians still argue whether this counts as the world's first card catalog, but it's definitely the first time anyone made a room of clay feel organized. And let's not forget the clay itself. Tablets were made by scribes who prepared each one with careful hands, mixing water and dust, pressing flat, and smoothing edges like baking cookies from hell. They'd write while the clay was still soft, using a reed stylus. Then they'd leave the tablets to dry in the sun or bake them in kilns. If the king was in a hurry and you always were, they baked them fast, turning them from scribbles to stone. As you stroll deeper into the archives, you find one of your favorite rooms. It's the chamber of lexical lists. It sounds boring. It is boring, but it's the good kind of boring. The kind that makes your eyelids heavy and your heart strangely full. Long lists of words, types of birds, names of metals, synonyms for storm. It's the Mesopotamian version of a thesaurus, and for you, it's bliss. Your inner librarian practically hums. A tablet catches your eye. You pick it up. An early version of a Sumerian-Akkadian dictionary. Every entry lovingly translated, scratched in careful parallel lines. You imagine some poor scribe hunching over this for hours, muttering, "Why do they need 5 words for mud?" while trying not to sneeze. You chuckle. Nerds have always suffered for their art. Of course, it's not all neat shelves and happy scribes. Some parts of the library are more chaoticist. The emergency archives. You had duplicate tablets stored in multiple places, just in case some overenthusiastic general burned down a wing while celebrating victory. Which, shockingly, happened. More than once. Wars messy like that. You round a corner into a smaller annex. The air grows stiller, heavier. These are the restricted text spells, curses, rituals too dangerous or bizarre to leave lying around. One tablet is labeled for calming the wrath of a storm god. Another, how to reverse a goat transformation. You hope that one's theoretical. You pull it from the shelf anyway, just in case. Here's a little-known fact. Some tablets were intentionally buried in the floor. Ritual texts, meant to be hidden from unworthy eyes or preserved from the apocalypse, depending on how optimistic the author was. You crouch down, fingers brushing the edge of a loose stone. Underneath, you suspect, is something sealed, sacred. Maybe tomorrow you'll dig it up, or not. Some mysteries are better left underfoot. One of your scribes approaches, looking appropriately terrified to interrupt. He carries a bundle of fresh tablets, recently copied from some ruin in your. You nod for him to leave them. He does. Then, surprisingly, he speaks. "My king," he whispers, "may I ask, why build all this?" You blink, and then you laugh. Gently, because the answer is obvious. Not for vanity. Not even for power. For memory, because every empire falls. Every monument crumbles. But writing outlasts the fire. You don't say all that, of course. You just nod, give him the royal stare, and go back to flipping through a tablet about the dietary habits of sacred cows. Outside Nineveh, markets open, soldiers train, ambassadors shout politely in 10 languages. But down here, in the quiet underworld of stone corridors and clay whispers, time moves differently. You are not just king, you are keeper. Not just of laws and taxes, but of dreams, doubts, and dusty lists of adjectives. And as long as these tablets remain, you remain. And someday, when someone digs through the rubble and brushes dirt from your words, maybe they'll understand that. Or maybe they'll just laugh at the goat spell. Either way, you'll be remembered. You hear it before you see it. The gentle chaos of styluses tapping clay. The rhythmic sigh of scribes muttering curses under their breath in 3 dead languages. The scriptorium, tucked within the northern wing of the palace, never really sleeps. You glide into its smoky quiet, a ghost among the living. Your sandals crunch softly over scattered fragments, shavings of clay from broken drafts and dropped ideas. The scribes don't look up. They've been trained not to. Each sits cross-legged on woven mats, hunched over a lap tablet, hands stained with ochre ink and crushed reed pulp. The air smells of fatigue, sweat, and the strangely pleasant tang of wet clay. You breathe it in like perfume. This is the heart of your empire's brain, where every scroll from Babylon, every prayer from Uruk, every confusing letter from Elam is copied, recopied, translated, and filed. And all under one terrifying pressure. You want everything. Every spell, every omen, every forgotten proverb carved into the floor of some crumbling ziggurat. If it's been written, you demand it. You float behind one scribe, a younger man with prematurely graying hair, as he labors over an astronomical chart. You peek down at the tablet. The stars don't look friendly tonight. Orion seems drunk, and Venus has wandered completely off course. Poor guy, he glances back just slightly. You smile faintly. He tightens his grip on the stylus. Every tablet here must be perfect. One error, one missed wedge, and you might dismiss the whole thing, or worse, send the poor soul to dig canals in the desert. Not that you actually do that often, but the rumor has a certain motivational quality. What historians still debate is whether this pressure created fear or excellence. The copies from your library are, astonishingly, some of the cleanest, most accurate versions of ancient texts ever recovered. There's a reason the Epic of Gilgamesh survives today, in part because your scribes took the time to get it right. One little wedge at a time. Of course, you didn't make it easy. You demanded they copy not just the words, but the spirit. You asked them to preserve old dialects, archaic formulas, even ancient errors, because who knows what meaning hides in a misplaced verb. You'd rather preserve a mystery than lose a nuance, which is noble, and also exhausting. Occasionally, the scribes rebel in subtle ways. You once found a tablet signed with a tiny doodle, bearded face rolling its eyes. Another included a note in the margin. This is the 5th time I've written this. May Nabu curse the person who smudged the last copy. You let it slide. You respected the sarcasm. A servant enters with more tablets. A fresh shipment from the Temple of Nippur. You motion for them to be set down on the floor. Instantly, 3 scribes rise to begin sorting. You watch as they mutter back and forth, trying to decide if a particular text is astronomy or just a very dramatic weather report. The sky opened and spat fire could go either way. Another scribe calls out, holding up a cracked tablet with a puzzled look. It's a new fragment from an unfamiliar myth. He's trying to figure out whether the goddess in question is seducing a river or threatening it. You grin. Why not both? This is how it always is, piecing together civilization from half-baked bricks. Every scholar in this room is balancing on a knife's edge between interpretation and guesswork. And you're the one demanding they do it faster. Sometimes you wonder what they think of you. Not the king in the throne room, flanked by spearmen and gold, but you, the ruler who spends his nights wandering the archives, quoting poetry, and arguing with dead authors. Do they think you're eccentric, obsessive, brilliant? The answer is yes. You move into the next room, the light dimming. This chamber is quieter, older. Here, The tablets are less about literature and more about bureaucracy, inventories, tax ledgers, shipment records. One lists all the goats delivered to the palace in the past lunar cycle. Another is a register of wheat distribution for a region you can't pronounce before coffee. And yet, you keep these too, because empire isn't built on glory alone. It's also built on receipts. The mundane, tedious, spreadsheet side of domination. Without grain, your soldiers starve. Without sheep, your priests can't sacrifice. Without scribes to write it all down, you have chaos. One particular tablet catches your eye. It's an angry letter from a minor governor, complaining that his scribes are being borrowed by your officials without being returned. He refers to you, obliquely, as the one who hoards pens. You raise your eyebrows, amused. You'll allow it. By the way, fun fringe facsim tablets in your library are fake. Not forged exactly but copied from older copies of older copies. Some scribes, not knowing a word or symbol, simply guessed. Occasionally, they invented new words entirely. It's the ancient version of lorem ipsum, and it drives modern scholars absolutely wild. Historians still argue whether some of these anomalies were deliberate, lazy, or acts of divine inspiration. You step back into the main scriptorium, and the noise returns. Clay cracking, pens scratching, sighs escaping. The work never stops. Neither do you, because there are still temples to raid, scrolls to translate, mysteries to decode. Somewhere out there, in some forgotten ruin, a priest is hiding a spell he doesn't want the king to read. And you're already planning to send someone to borrow it. No one ever said obsession was tidy. You leave the scriptorium behind, stepping into another chamber where the air is somehow thicker, laced with incense and the faint coppery temps of dried blood. This part of the library feels different. Less academic, more theatrical. You're in the room where lions, laws, and love spells live together in uncomfortable harmony. This is where the library gets weird. You start with a shelf devoted to royal decrees, dry, dusty tablets filled with proclamations about land rights, tax exemptions, and mandatory goat inspections. Not the most riveting material. Unless you're deeply invested in how many barley measures a man named Nabomukan Apli owes the crown. He owes 6, by the way. He's late again, but just a few steps over, and suddenly you're in an entirely different world. The shelves turn from politics to passion. Here are tablets inscribed with incantations to draw affection, to cool jealousy, to ensure firmness in the presence of a romantic partner. Some of these charms are surprisingly graphic, though still PG-13 enough for even your most sensitive scribe. You lift one and read aloud softly. May her heart melt like wax. May she long for my gaze as a calf for its mother. Poetic, sure, if a bit intense. You wonder if anyone ever used this line and got dumped anyway. Probably. Love magic has always been a gamble, but it's not all dreamy sighs and heartache. You wander into a row devoted to more aggressive charms, binding spells, reversal curses, and one tablet that's basically a Mesopotamian version of she will not look at any other man without being struck blind. Subtle. Then there are the rituals, the rituals. Some involve obscure ingredients, crocodile fat, gazelle fur, clay shaped like a demon's tongue. One scroll suggests standing naked at sunrise, facing east, while chanting the names of 7 obscure gods, and holding a fish. You wonder if that one was written as a joke? Scribes get bored to modern eyes. This might seem chaotic. How do lion hunts and legal codes end up shelved beside love potions and exorcisms? But you see the logic. Your empire isn't a place of order. It's a place of tension, of contrast, of lions one day and lullabies the next. Speaking of lions, you arrive at one of your more personal collections. The lion manuals, yes, those exist. Several tablets here are devoted to the care, handling, and more commonly the ritual. Slaying of lions. Some contain actual combat techniques, where to strike, how to avoid being mauled. Others delve into the symbolic meanings. The lion is the rage of the gods, one reads. Another says, to tame the lion is to tame death. You wonder, how many of your enemies understood that when they watched you drag a lion through the palace gates, bleeding but upright? There's even a curious little volume titled If a Lion Walks into Your City, then followed by a list of predictions. All bad. The best case scenario involves famine, the worst, total annihilation. So, basically, don't invite lions to dinner. You sit for a moment on a low stone bench, absorbing the overlap. Here in your library, the boundaries blur between science and magic, poetry and practicality, fear and hope. This isn't a collection of facts. It's a portrait of the human mind, with all its brilliance and neuroses. And it's messy. Some tablets contradict each other. One says to burn a specific herb to calm a ghost. Another says that herb summons ghosts. You kept both, because, why not? You weren't here to tidy the universe. You were here to capture it. Some scholars today still try to untangle your categories. Were the law texts shelved with the healing spells on purpose? Was it a metaphor, a mistake? Historians still argue whether you had a grand organizational system or just liked the thrill of surprise. You reach for one more tablet, weathered, cracked at the corners. It's a hymn to Ishtar, goddess of love and war. The poem is beautiful, lyrical, nearly musical. It starts with passion, builds to fury, and ends in a whisper of longing. You read it aloud, softly. Even now, the words hold power, not magic. Maybe, but wait, outside, you can hear the faint sounds of the palace waking. Guards moving, bells ringing, sandals against stone. But in here, you are alone with your books, your beasts, and your buried hearts. You shift to the next tablet, without even realizing it. A medical incantation. The patient has stomach pain. The cure, a goat liver, some copper dust, and a very awkward chant about digestive demons. Ancient medicine was ... creative. You chuckle, and then pause. Because even amid the absurdity, there's something comforting here. These people, your people, were trying to explain their bodies, their lovers, their kings, their fears. One wedge at a time. So you gather these pieces. You stack them carefully. You build a world where lions roar beside lullabies, and laws live next to longing, because all of it matters. All of it belongs. You stand again, leaving the bench behind. Ahead is another hallway, another room of dusty voices. And you, their collector. You slip down another hallway, this one darker, the torchlight barely licking the tops of the shelves. This is where the quieter tablets live, the ones that don't scream with blood or love or war. They murmur, whisper, argue. You're in the philosophical stacks now, though no one calls them that. These are texts about thought, how the gods speak, how numbers behave, how the stars move. But most fascinating of all, some of these tablets talk back. One sits crooked on a low shelf, unusually shaped, a little warped at the edges. You pick it up, the first line reads, "If the priest performs this rite incorrectly, the gods will know, and he will be punished." Charming, but beneath it, etched in a different hand, you find a reply. The gods are already angry. Might as well risk it. You smirk. Some scribe, centuries ago, dared to challenge the text. Whether he meant it seriously or sarcastically, no one knows. Historians still argue whether these annotations were scholarly critiques or just ancient sass. But either way, the conversation feels alive. Many of these tablets are dialogues between gods and humans, teachers and students, sometimes even two versions of the same idea. One line declares that the stars control your fate. The next insists the gods overrule the stars. A third tablet, jammed in sideways, grumbles that priests can't read the stars anyway. You run your fingers over the wedges. There's something thrilling about the contradiction. You've built an empire on strength, certainty, control, but in here, it's all questions. No answers. Just endless nudging, poking, doubting. You step into a side room and find one of your favorite oddities. A series of tablets. Each one written in a progressively smaller hand. Like someone was trying to see how much they could fit on a single square inch of clay. The final tablet is barely larger than a fig, yet holds over 300 signs. It's been baked so hard it could chip a tooth. You imagine the scribe who made it leaning in, nose nearly touching the clay, eyes squinting in lamplight, maybe, whispering, "This is ridiculous," with every line. He wasn't wrong. Nearby, a shelf contains riddles, actual riddles. What has a mouth but never speaks? What walks on 4 legs in the morning? No, wait, that one's Greek. But you get the idea. Some are clever, some are incomprehensible. One just reads, "If your ox disappears and you are not sad, why?" The answer is missing. Maybe it was a bad ox. You sit down cross-legged on a straw mat, a stack of these riddle tablets in your lap. Outside, the clatter of weapons in the training yard echoes faintly through the stone. But in here, it's just questions. You come across a set of texts from a foreign province, possibly from the Zagros Mountains. The signs are jagged, unfamiliar, hard to parse, but the tone is unmistakable. This is a challenge to a Babylonian scholar. Written in mock Akkadian. You recognize the tone. Your math is wrong. Your gods are dumb. And here's why. It's the world's first peer review. With more insults, you're struck, not for the first time, by how alive these tablets feel. We often think of ancient writing as solemn, dusty, sacred. But no, these are opinionated. Some are desperate. Some are hilarious. One simply says, "Do not trust your neighbor's grain." You're not even sure if that's advice or a proverb or just a very bitter man writing in the margins. Another tablet tries to calculate the volume of a truncated cone. You don't actually know what a truncated cone is, but you admire the confidence. The math is sound. Probably you never quite trusted Babylonian decimals. Fun fact, there's evidence some scribes copied from damaged originals. And when they didn't know a symbol, they'd either invent one or mark it with something like illegible. Later, scribes, confused, would copy that exact symbol, thinking it was a word. This means that somewhere in your library, a completely made-up cuneiform sign might now mean chicken or divine hiccup. Scholars today still puzzle over these and debate whether they're genuine or the result of a tired scribe who needed a nap. You place one such tablet back and lean against the shelf. It's peaceful here. No roaring lions, no whining governors, no worried priests asking you to fund another temple roof. Just arguments, riddles, and the occasional scribble. Meltdown etched forever in clay. You reach for a scroll fragment, well, technically, a cylinder. It contains a conversation between two gods about whether humans are worth the trouble. One god says yes. They sing songs and bring offerings. The other replies, they forget your name after one bad harvest. Harsh, but fair. There's something comforting in this chaos. You built your library to preserve the world's knowledge. Yes, but also its doubts, its jokes, its contradictions. You didn't want a shrine to certainty. You wanted a conversation that never ends. Before you leave the room, you glance down at one more oddity, a damaged tablet with only a few surviving lines. You will build, and it will fall. You will write, and it will be read. That is enough. You don't remember commissioning this one, but you like it, and you don't need to know who wrote it, or why it speaks to you. You place it back gently and rise. The clay cracks faintly underfoot. Somewhere in the distance, a lion growls. Of course it does. You wander back toward the western wing of the library, where the air is thick with the scent of burnt cedar and ink-stained scroll wrappings. Here, the tablets carry less poetry and more punch, their war records, victory lists, siege manuals, and grim tallies of heads collected and cities burned. It's the room where you keep the story of how you conquered the world, or, at least, how you want it remembered. You run your fingers along the shelf labeled Elam campaigns. The tablets here are heavier than most, not in weight, but in tone. Brutal stuff. There's one particular slab, covered front and back, that boasts, I destroyed Susa. I laid its sanctuaries in ruins. I took the statues of their gods. I made their kings bow before me. Not exactly subtle, but subtlety was never your weapon of choice. Still, it's written beautifully. Stylized, formal, almost poetic. You read it aloud, slowly. It's equal parts blood and theater. You can practically hear the distant clash of chariots and the screams of terrified scribes scrambling to hide their archives. Spoiler, you took those, too. Your war propaganda was no accident. These weren't just battlefield reports. They were part of your performance. You crafted your military campaigns like epics full of villains, omens, divine guidance, and your own perfectly timed wrath. Every tablet served as a stone press release. You weren't just winning wars. You were branding yourself. Take the account of your campaign in Egypt, the one where you drove out the Kushite king, installed a puppet ruler, then marched triumphantly through Thebes. You didn't just say, I won, you said, the enemy fled before me like bats before the sun. Their gods abandoned them. Their temples crumbled at the sound of my chariot. Honestly, if you had access to slow-motion replays, you'd have used them. One fringe fact most people miss. These texts exaggerate a lot. Scholars today point out inconsistencies, numbers of enemy casualties that defy math, enemy kings who were defeated multiple times in the same year, miraculous omens that always seemed to occur right before battle. Historians still argue whether you believed your own spin or simply understood the value of spectacle. Probably both. You didn't just fight with swords, you fought with stories, and you were good at both. You walk past a smaller tablet now, wedged between two larger ones. It's a field report, an actual one, from a low-ranking officer. No epic flair, no divine intervention. Just, we found the enemy. They ran, we chased, many died. Refreshing in its own way. You keep it tucked beside the grander tales. Balance. There's another section here that always gives you pause. The lists of tribute. After every campaign, you demanded more than gold or livestock. You demanded texts, books, scrolls, secret rituals, wisdom. You weren't just looting temples, you were looting knowledge. Priests would beg to keep their sacred scrolls. You'd nod politely, then take them anyway. That's how you built this library, not just with the thoughts of your own people, but with the stolen minds of a dozen other cultures. It wasn't enough to win. You had to understand them. You had to know what their gods whispered, what their kings feared, what their doctors prescribed when the king sneezed on a Thursday. Your conquest of Babylon is a prime example. You didn't just sack the city. You kidnapped its scholars, shipped them north, made them work in your library. Imagine the mix of horror and awe those men must have felt, seeing their most sacred texts lined up alongside your lion hunting manuals, and they weren't the only ones. You stop in front of a row labeled enemy letters. These are intercepted messages, notes between kings, generals, governors. Some are desperate, some insulting. One is just a shopping list. You kept them all. Intelligence is everything, especially when it tells you which neighbor is planning a revolt because someone dented their statue of Ishtar. Occasionally, you read these aloud at banquets. For fun, there was the one where the Elamite prince begged his uncle not to make peace, because, quote, Ashurbanipal smells like fish and thinks he's a god. You laughed so hard you dropped a roast duck. You kneel beside one particularly dense tablet. It's a treaty broken, obviously. You trace the curses inscribed at the bottom. May he who violates this pact be devoured by dogs. His name erased, his bones scattered. Poetic justice. You ordered the man's name chiseled off every record after you crushed him. It's almost cute how well it aged, but you're not heartless. Well, okay, maybe a little. But you understand that violence isn't just physical, it's historical. You don't just erase people with swords, you erase them with silence. If their stories don't survive, they vanish. You built this library to ensure you would not vanish, and you won't. Not with 30,000 tablets whispering your victories, your thoughts, your failures. Not with your blood spilled on clay beside the names of your enemies. You stand, spine cracking. Your knees remind you that you're not 20 anymore. The fire of youth has cooled into the heat of obsession. You wipe a layer of dust from your robe and stroll back toward the central chamber. Your fingers brushing the edges of your war tablets like a man checking the locks on his memory. Because in the end, these aren't just records. They're weapons. And you still know how to wield them. You move east, toward the quieter halls, the ones that echo less with conquest and more with consequence. This part of the library is slower, softer, and oddly soothing, like a temple wrapped in clay. The walls narrow, the light shifts, and suddenly you're surrounded by tablets not of war or prophecy, but of ritual, healing, and the meticulous maintenance of cosmic balance. You step carefully here, not out of fear, but out of reverence. These shelves hum with divine attention. You're in the section devoted to temple records, priestly rituals, and the silent machinery of daily devotion. Most people assume kings care only about armies and taxes, but you understand that gods must be fed, bathed, sung to, and when they throw celestial tantrums, the survival of your empire depends just as much on appeasing cosmic forces as it does on managing your grain quotas. You reach for a narrow palm-sized tablet. It's a ritual schedule. Day 5, offer beer to Marduk. Day 6, burn cedar for Ishtar. Day 7, bathe the statue of Nabu, dry with linen, no cotton. You wonder if the priest who wrote it ever got the days mixed up. Giving Ishtar a beer instead of incense probably got someone in trouble, or turned them into a frog. Historians still argue whether these rituals were believed literally or symbolically. Did priests actually think washing a god statue kept plagues at bay? Or was it just a public performance, part devotion, part theater, part state-sponsored anxiety relief? You, of course, insisted they do it all perfectly, just in case. There's no harm in hedging your bets when eternity's on the line. You walk a little farther and find yourself surrounded by ritual instructions. Not just the dramatic ones, thunder banishments and moon blessings, but the subtle, meticulous ceremonies for everyday problems. One tablet offers a cure for sleep paralysis. Grind juniper. Chant the name of a forgotten wind demon, and sleep facing west. Another gives a precise sequence for calming a haunted house, which begins by painting a doorway with goat's milk, and ends by never mentioning the ghost again, ever. There's an entire shelf of rituals for childbirth, complete with chants to prevent miscarriage, blessings for fertility, and prayers for strong sons. One particularly moving tablet contains a lullaby. A midwife was instructed to sing while holding the newborn little breath. Child of light, rest under the sky's eyelid. You reread that one more than once. Some rituals are heartbreakingly practical. One tablet details the steps to dispose of a body during plague season while avoiding divine wrath. Another shows how to draw protective signs around a sick room, so the disease doesn't walk into the courtyard like a jealous neighbor. You don't know if it worked, but it gave people something to do when nothing else could be done. And sometimes that's all ritual is. You find a chamber filled with omen texts, predictive tablets. You sigh. These were always your favorite. There's one row for liver omens, if the right lobe has a dent. Beware political betrayal. Another for bird signs, if a raven croaks at dawn. Change your travel plans, and yet another for dreams. You pick up one at random. If you dream of teeth falling out, the harvest will fail. Classic. Then there's the meteorology section. One scribe recorded the wind direction for 10 years straight, and then confidently declared, "The gods are left-handed." You admired the commitment, if not the conclusion. Occasionally, you held public readings of favorable omens, especially before battles or tax collection. You'd stand on the temple steps, tablet in hand, and proclaim, The river was smooth. The clouds drifted north. Victory is assured. Your generals would cheer, your priests would bow, and you'd pray the gods weren't in a sarcastic mood that day. There's one corner of this wing, though, that always feels heavier. It's where you store the unclean texts. These were dangerous in a different way, not because they spoke of war or rebellion, but because they asked questions. A scroll written by a lonely priest in exile asks, "Why does the god allow the storm to strike the temple?" Another begins with the chilling line, "He prayed, but nothing answered." You kept those too, not because they were useful, but because they were honest. Even gods have bad days. And empires are built by people who wonder if anyone's listening. You sit again, this time beside a shallow basin meant for ritual washing. You trail your fingers through the dry dust at its bottom. You remember attending a festival here, once priests in white linen, chanting as they circled the basin, their voices echoing off the carved stone. You'd felt power then, but not your power. Theirs, the gods. Or maybe just the crowds. Belief in them, it's strange how quiet it is now. But the silence isn't empty. It's full of waiting. You glance over your shoulder at a crumbling tablet, partially melted by time. Its last readable line, "Speak the names, or they will be forgotten." So you do. Not aloud but in your mind. You recite the gods, the chants, the steps. You remember them all. Because your library is not just a vault. It's a voice. And as long as someone walks these halls, king or scholar, priest or dreamer, then none of it is truly gone. You drift into a smaller corridor now. One you often forget exists until you stumble into it by accident, though, deep down, you suspect your feet know the way. It's dimmer here, the walls pressing closer, the shelves uneven and rough. This part of the library isn't for state secrets or godly hymns. It's for you. This is where you keep your personal collection. You don't announce it. You never told the scribes, never ordered the carving of any imperial catalog stone, but over the years, you quietly gathered tablets that felt different, odd, touching, sometimes completely useless, all tucked away like a private whisper. The first tablet you see is one you found in a ruined border town. It's not even written in proper Akkadian. Just some rustic dialect scratched in crude wedges by someone who probably didn't know what they were doing. But the message, it's a letter from a father to his son. Work hard, eat well, be kind to the oxen. Your mother misses you. That was it. You kept it. You reach for another. A clay envelope still sealed, though you already know what's inside. A love letter. The sender never got to deliver, it probably never got the courage. Or maybe the war came too soon. It starts simply. To the girl at the market who smells of honey and wears green. You never opened it further. You didn't need to. This little room is filled with stories that no one deemed important. A slave's account of his dreams. A farmer's theory on why goats behave differently under full moons. A child's drawing of a fish scratched into drying clay. And one very serious tablet titled, "A Complete List of Birds I Have Seen." You admire the dedication. What connects all of them is not their grandeur, but their intimacy. No divine mandatus, no declarations of conquest. Just people, trying to make sense of their world. One clay scrap at a time. You run your hand across a cracked shelf and find a fragment. You barely remember taking half a lullaby, written by a grandmother to calm her grandson during storms. Don't fear the thunder. It's just the gods drumming their feet because they miss you. The other half is gone, lost in the ruins of Nineveh. But the line stuck with you. Still does. There's a myth historians never quite piece together, found only in this room. It's badly preserved, several tablets are water damaged, but it tells the story of a nameless shepherd who argues with the moon. Not prays to it, argues with it. The moon keeps rising too early, ruining the shepherd's sleep. So he shouts insults at it until the moon answers back. You love that story. Not for the theology, but for the defiance. The idea that someone, somewhere, once looked at the sky and yelled, "Let me rest." Iconic. One fringe piece here defies all cataloging. It's a fictional letter from a cat to its owner. Yes, really. I caught a rat. You praised the dog. You're an idiot. You have no idea who wrote it, or why. But it survived 3 floods, and one very angry librarian. Must be fate. Historians still argue whether this room was part of the official archive or just a chaotic side project that spiraled out of control. Some say you were hoarding nonsense. Others think you were capturing the true pulse of the empire. You just couldn't throw any of it away. You pick up a tiny cylinder. It's a recording of a court jester's performance. Mostly jokes. Some bad, some worse. One about a bald priest and a leaking jar still makes you chuckle. The laugh echoes, bouncing oddly off the stone, startling a lizard skittering along the wall. You nod at him like an old friend. Not everything here is cheerful. There is a series of grief texts, laments written after the plagues, after the wars, after the river drowned a village during the spring melt. You find one from a mother mourning her daughter. She laughed like water. Now the well is dry. You read that line again and again. It never loses weight. In the corner, wrapped in linen, is a tablet that has no writing, just a thumbprint, pressed deep into wet clay and then left to dry. You don't know who made it, but someone did, and that was enough. Because in the end, these aren't just records, they're weapons, and you still know how to wield them. You move east, toward the quieter halls, the ones that echo less with conquest and more with consequence. This part of the library is slower, softer, and oddly soothing, like a temple wrapped in clay. The walls narrow, the light shifts, and suddenly you're surrounded by tablets, not of war or prophecy, but of ritual, healing, and the meticulous maintenance of cosmic balance. You step carefully here, not out of fear, but out of reverence. These shelves hum with divine attention. You're in the section devoted to temple records, priestly rituals, and the silent machinery of daily devotion. Most people assume kings care only about armies and taxes, but you understand that gods must be fed, bathed, sung to, and when they throw celestial tantrums, the survival of your empire depends just as much on appeasing cosmic forces as it does on managing your grain quotas. You reach for a narrow palm-sized tablet. It's a ritual schedule. Day 5. Offer beer to Marduk. Day 6. Burn cedar for Ishtar. Day 7. Bathe the statue of Nabu, dry with linen, no cotton. You wonder if the priest who wrote it ever got the days mixed up. Giving Ishtar a beer instead of incense probably got someone in trouble, or turned them into a frog. Historians still argue whether these rituals were believed literally or symbolically. Did priests actually think washing a god statue kept plagues at bay? Or was it just a public performance, part devotion, part theater, part state-sponsored anxiety relief? You, of course, insisted they do it all perfectly, just in case. There's no harm in hedging your bets when eternity's on the line. You walk a little farther and find yourself surrounded by ritual instructions. Not just the dramatic ones, thunder banishments and moon blessings, but the subtle, meticulous ceremonies for everyday problems. One tablet offers a cure for sleep paralysis. Grind juniper, chant the name of a forgotten wind demon, and sleep facing west. Another gives a precise sequence for calming a haunted house, which begins by painting a doorway with goat's milk and ends by never mentioning the ghost again, ever. There's an entire shelf of rituals for childbirth, complete with chants to prevent miscarriage, blessings for fertility, and prayers for strong sons. One particularly moving tablet contains a lullaby a midwife was instructed to sing while holding the newborn little breath. Child of light, rest under the sky's eyelid. You reread that one more than once. Some rituals are heartbreakingly practical. One tablet details the steps to dispose of a body during plague season while avoiding divine wrath. Another shows how to draw protective signs around a sick room, so the disease doesn't walk into the courtyard like a jealous neighbor. You don't know if it worked, but it gave people something to do when nothing else could be done. And sometimes that's all ritual is. You find a chamber filled with omen texts, predictive tablets. You sigh, these were always your favorite. There's one row for liver omens if the right lobe has a dent. Beware political betrayal, another for bird signs if a raven croaks at dawn. Change your travel plans, and yet another for dreams. You pick up one at random. If you dream of teeth falling out, the harvest will fail. Classic. Then there's the meteorology section. One scribe recorded the wind direction for 10 years straight and then confidently declared, "The gods are left-handed." You admired the commitment, if not the conclusion. Occasionally, you held public readings of favorable omens, especially before battles or tax collection. You'd stand on the temple steps, tablet in hand, and proclaim, "The liver was smooth. The clouds drifted north. Victory is assured." Your generals would cheer, your priests would bow, and you'd pray the gods weren't in a sarcastic mood that day. There's one corner of this wing, though that always feels heavier. It's where you store the unclean texts. These were dangerous in a different way, not because they spoke of war or rebellion, but because they asked questions. A scroll written by a lonely priest in exile asks, "Why does the god allow the storm to strike the temple?" Another begins with the chilling line, "He prayed, but nothing answered." You kept those too, not because they were useful, but because they were honest. Even gods have bad days, and empires are built by people who wonder if anyone's listening. You sit again, this time beside a shallow basin meant for ritual washing. You trail your fingers through the dry dust at its bottom. You remember attending a festival here, once priests in white linen, chanting as they circled the basin, their voices echoing off the carved stone. You'd felt power then, but not your power. Theirs, the gods. Or maybe just the crowds. Belief in them, it's strange how quiet it is now. But the silence isn't empty. It's full of waiting. You glance over your shoulder at a crumbling tablet, partially melted by time. Its last readable line, "Speak the names, or they will be forgotten." So you do. Not aloud but, in your mind, you recite the gods, the chants, the steps, you remember them all. Because your library is not just a vault, it's a voice. And as long as someone walks these halls, king or scholar, priest or dreamer, then none of it is truly gone. You drift into a smaller corridor now. One you often forget exists, until you stumble into it by accident, though deep down you suspect your feet know the way. It's dimmer here, the walls pressing closer, the shelves uneven and rough. This part of the library isn't for state secrets or godly hymns, it's for you. This is where you keep your personal collection. You don't announce it. You never told the scribes, never ordered the carving of any imperial catalog stone, but over the years, you quietly gathered tablets that felt different, odd, touching, sometimes completely useless, all tucked away like a private whisper. The first tablet you see is one you found in a ruined border town. It's not even written in proper Akkadian, just some rustic dialect scratched in crude wedges by someone who probably didn't know what they were doing. But the message, it's a letter from a father to his son. Work hard, eat well, be kind to the oxen. Your mother misses you. That was it. You kept it. You reach for another. A clay envelope still sealed, though you already know what's inside. A love letter. The sender never got to deliver it, probably never got the courage. Or maybe the war came too soon. It starts simply. To the girl at the market who smells of honey and wears green. You never opened it further. You didn't need to. This little room is filled with stories that no one deemed important. A slave's account of his dreams. A farmer's theory on why goats behave differently under full moons. A child's drawing of a fish scratched into drying clay. And one very serious tablet titled, "A Complete List of Birds I Have Seen." You admire the dedication. What connects all of them is not their grandeur, but their intimacy. No divine mandates, no declarations of conquest. Just people trying to make sense of their world. One clay scrap at a time. You run your hand across a cracked shelf and find a fragment. You barely remember taking half a lullaby, written by a grandmother to calm her grandson during storms. Don't fear the thunder. It's just the gods drumming their feet because they miss you. The other half is gone, lost in the ruins of Nineveh. But the line stuck with you. Still does. There's a myth historians never quite pieced together, found only in this room. It's badly preserved. Several tablets are water damaged, but it tells the story of a nameless shepherd who argues with the moon. Not prays to it, argues with it. The moon keeps rising too early, ruining the shepherd's sleep, so he shouts insults at it until the moon answers back. You love that story. Not for the theology, but for the defiance. The idea that someone, somewhere, once looked at the sky and yelled, "Let me rest." Iconic. One fringe piece here defies all cataloging. It's a fictional letter from a cat to its owner. Yes, really, I caught a rat. You praised the dog. You're an idiot. You have no idea who wrote it, or why, but it survived 3 floods and one very angry librarian. Must be fate. Historians still argue whether this room was part of the official archive, or just a chaotic side project that spiraled out of control. Some say you were hoarding nonsense. Others think you were capturing the true pulse of the empire. You just couldn't throw any of it away. You pick up a tiny cylinder. It's a recording of a court jester's performance. Mostly jokes. Some bad, some worse. One about a bald priest and a leaking jar still makes you chuckle. The laugh echoes, bouncing oddly off the stone, startling a lizard skittering along the wall. You nod at him like an old friend. Not everything here is cheerful. There's a series of grief texts, laments written after the plagues, after the wars, after the river drowned a village during the spring melt. You find one from a mother mourning her daughter. She laughed like water. Now the well is dry. You read that line again and again. It never loses weight. In the corner, wrapped in linen, is a tablet that has no writing, just a thumbprint, pressed deep into wet clay and then left to dry. You don't know who made it, but someone did, and that was enough. The final chamber of the vault isn't filled with shelves. It's mostly empty, just a circle of stones and a narrow pit in the floor. Your burial archive. When a tablet is too fractured to preserve, or too dangerous to destroy, it goes here. Rituals are performed, names are erased, and the clay is laid to rest. You kneel by the edge and peer in. The bottom is dark, undisturbed. Some of your most sensitive secrets sleep there now. War plans that were never enacted. Names of traitors who were never caught. The true body count of your longest siege. Even one unfinished poem you wrote yourself, half bitter, half apologetic. You couldn't bear to throw it out, but you couldn't let it live either. You wonder sometimes if this vault is more honest than the rest of the library. Up there, the stories are curated, sharpened, polished until they shine with glory or tragedy. Down here, they're raw, unstable, uncomfortable, but real. You rise slowly, your knees grumbling again. Maybe in your next life, you'll rule from a chair. As you leave the vault, you press the stone door closed behind you, sealing in the whispers. You don't lock it. You never do. You want someone else, someday, to find it, to read it, to understand that you were not just a king of lions and war chants. You were also a keeper of shadows. Back in the upper halls, the light feels almost artificial after the vault's gloom. The torchlight glints off polished tablets. The floor creaks just slightly underfoot, and the walls seem to hum with renewed breath. You stretch your shoulders. The weight of those buried truths still lingers, clinging to your robe like ash. But here the world appears orderly again. You make your way toward the gallery of correspondence. Yes, an entire wing of the library is dedicated not to spells, or astronomy, or even epic battles, but to mail. Royal letters, petitions, requests, complaints. A slow-motion conversation with the entire empire, written one clay envelope at a time. The first section is filled with letters to you, not the official ones from kings and priests. That's in the diplomatic wing. These are from your people, your subjects, the farmers, merchants, stargazers, and innkeepers, who felt bold or desperate enough to address the king directly. You lift a tablet near the front. It begins. To the mighty lion of Nineveh, may your beard never itch. Good start. The writer goes on to describe a stolen donkey, a suspicious neighbor, and a possible curse involving overripe figs. You kept it. Why? Because it made you laugh. And because the desperation was real. Another letter, more somber, reads, My husband, died in the king's service. His brother took our ox. I beg justice. You pause. You remember this one. You ruled in her favor. Sent her a new ox and a small jade pendant from your treasury. A minor act, but in your mind, the library wouldn't be complete without the voice of the grieving. And then there are the absurd ones. A baker insisting that his cinnamon buns healed a sprained ankle. A fisherman who claimed to have caught a fish that quoted scripture. A child's drawing of a three-headed horse labeled for king. You filed them here, next to the serious ones. Because empires are made of both the miraculous and the ridiculous. Historians still argue whether you actually read all these letters. Most say no, to many, to mundane, but they don't know about the quiet nights you spent here, when the palace was asleep and the library was yours alone. You read them, not all, but enough you move deeper into the gallery. This part contains your replies. Or, more accurately, the replies your scribes crafted based on your moods, notes or occasional grunts. Some are gracious, others curt. 1. To a noble reads, if your goat is smarter than your steward, replace the steward. Sharp, effective, but your favorite. A short letter to a child in a remote village who had asked, quite seriously, whether the king could stop thunder. You responded, thunder is the sky's way of stretching. I cannot stop it, but I can send you this. You enclosed a small painted charm. You never found out if it worked. But it was the only reply you ever signed yourself. There's an entire shelf for interregional gossip, disguised as reports. Governors tattling on each other. Temple officials accusing rivals of miscounting offerings. One claims that a rival priest turned into a bird. Another swears he saw your image in his soup. You didn't reply to those, but you kept them. You pass. A long corridor now, lined with records of trials and testimonies. This, too, is correspondence, a dance between accusation and defense, truth and performance. You skim a tablet from a case about stolen barley. The accused defends himself eloquently, claiming the gods redirected the grain to a more righteous household. The court disagreed, but you admired the creativity. Further down, there's a heartbreaking exchange between two sisters, one confined to a temple as a sacred virgin, the other forced into marriage with a drunkard. They wrote to each other for years, hoping the letters would be preserved, if not answered. You kept every one. One fringe find from this wing, a tablet with a clay thumbprint, nothing more. No message, just the mark. Your archivists debated for weeks whether it was a mistake or a silent plea. You ordered it archived under unspoken. You sit now on a low bench near the center of the room. A tablet rests in your hands. It's addressed not to you, but to the king who comes after. A boy from the northern provinces wrote it, claiming he dreamt of a ruler with stars in his eyes and lions at his feet. I think you will be kind, he wrote. You wonder if he meant you, or someone else. Either way it stayed. These letters, their questions, jokes, blessings, insults are the heartbeat of your library. More than the omens, more than the conquest. Tablets, more than the royal myths. Because they prove that someone was listening. And someone cared enough to speak. You stand slowly, knees grumbling again. You're almost fond of the ache now. Proof that time still moves. That even gods must stoop. As you leave the gallery, you whisper something almost without realizing it. I heard you. A small reply, centuries late, but sometimes, that's all a letter needs. You move toward one of the oldest wings, now the foundation level. Not the grandest, not the most dramatic, but in many ways, the heart of everything. This is where it began. The first shelves, the first clay, the first attempts at making memory permanent. The hall feels ancient, even to you. The air smells different, less like incense and more like earth and time. The light is dimmer here, not because of poor design, but because it always has been. You didn't build this wing. Your father did, or maybe his father. You've just been its caretaker. The shelves are short, the ceilings low, as if the builders were afraid to challenge the gods with too much ambition. The tablets here are rough, cracked, and often incomplete, but they hold a different kind of power and polished, raw, and full of beginnings. You kneel beside the oldest shelf. The tablets here are practically fossils. One contains a tax record from a village that no longer exists. Another is an inventory of oxen, with names like Lumpy and Fast. You pause on one particular piece, a hymn to a forgotten god whose name is mostly eroded. All that remains is the phrase, "He walks with the rain." You read it aloud. It sounds like poetry, even if you don't know who he is anymore. Historians still argue whether this part of the library was meant to be sacred or simply functional. But you suspect the answer is both. The early kings didn't separate the spiritual from the administrative. To write a grain shipment was to invoke divine order. To count sheep was to mirror the stars. You pass a small cluster of tablets wrapped in linen. These were discovered in a collapsed temple decades ago, preserved by accident under a fallen wall. Their prayers, mostly, and lists. If the grain rots, say this. If the sky burns, say that. You wonder who whispered them, if they worked, if someone believed they would. And then you reach the wall. Not a literal one though, there's plenty of stone, but a moment. The place where writing changed here, in this forgotten corner, someone decided to try something new. A tablet records the same story twice. Once in the usual rigid signs. Then again, just below, in a looser, more experimental hand. The same plot. A king, a monster, a cave. But the second version includes jokes, sarcasm, a jab at the king's cooking skills. It's the first hint that someone thought, maybe stories can be fun, too. You smile. This is your kind of history. One clay fragment nearby bears a single line. I write because no one listens. It's unsigned. Probably scribbled in frustration. But it's survived, somehow. Tucked behind a flood record and a marriage contract. Both now barely legible. You glance at the wall inscription. The one your grandfather carved when he opened the first archive room. What is not written is already lost. At the time, it sounded dramatic. But the older you get, the truer it feels. You turn to leave but stop. You see a basket in the corner. One you haven't noticed in years. Inside are training tablets, the practice slates for young scribes. Clumsy letters, half-finished lists, drawings of oxen and stars, and angry-looking people with exaggerated eyebrows. One tablet just says, "I hate clay." You snort. But there's something tender in these mistakes. You run your fingers across the marks, imagining the trembling hands that made them, the long hours bent over damp clay, the muttered curses, the rare moments of pride. You stand again, stretching. Your back sings the familiar chorus of age and effort. You whisper to the empty room, "You did well." And you mean it not just to the long-dead scribes, but to the boys and girls who once tried and failed and tried again. You pass a tablet mounted in a frame, one of the very first entries in the Royal Archive. It simply says, "The storm came. We survived. We remember." You touch it briefly, then turn toward the exit as you walk back up into the higher levels. The hum of the newer halls returns. But beneath it, you carry the weight of this place's roots. The quiet confidence of knowing that before the victories, before the rituals, before the stars, there was someone, somewhere, pressing clay with the belief that their words mattered, and they were right. The sun has shifted now, casting long, golden beams through the slitted windows of the uppermost level. It's that strange hour when the light feels softer, older, like the day is gently preparing to lie down. You find yourself back near the central atrium, where the great lion statues watch eternally from each corner, frozen mid-roar, their mouths agape with silent judgment, or perhaps just boredom. You never could decide which. You move toward the gallery of wisdom texts. This is the wing that always smells faintly of incense and crushed herbs, as if the thoughts written here carried a scent of their own. These are not stories of war, nor rituals, nor complaints about stolen oxen. This is where people came to understand the world, or at least to pretend they did. The shelves here are shorter but denser. Every surface is filled with proverbs, philosophical arguments, dream interpretations, medical texts, riddles, and strange moral tales that usually end with someone getting turned into a fish. You always loved this section not because it brought clarity, but because it didn't. The questions were better than the answers. You pick up a tablet from the Wisdom of Shunurgul, a particularly dramatic philosopher who once wrote, "Man is like a clay pot, useful, fragile, and usually full of something." You remember that line because it made one of your generals laugh so hard he snorted wine into a diplomat's lap. You kept the tablet, the wine-stained robe, to dot further. Down the aisle, you find a set of riddles compiled by temple scribes. They range from clever to absolutely deranged. One reads, "I eat without mouth, fly without wings, and drown in sand. What am I?" The answer is fire, allegedly. Another one simply asks, "Why is the moon shy?" No answer is given. Classic. 1. Fringe tablet here is unique. It offers philosophical commentary on a dream where a man marries his own shadow. The author debates whether this is a metaphor for ego, fear, or laundry. Historians still argue whether it's satire or sincere. You personally think it's both. You stroll past a cabinet labeled practical advice, which is a generous term for what it contains. One tablet suggests that to cure a headache, one should whisper into the left ear of a donkey and immediately eat pickled turnip. Another recommends sitting under a fig tree during thunderstorms to avoid divine anger. You made a note never to try either. Yet amid the absurd, there are gems. A physician's guide with surprisingly accurate observations on the pulse. A treatise on the effects of moonlight on sleep. A scholar's long letter meditating on loneliness in old age, which ends, "The stars are less cold when you name them." You paused when you first read that. You pause again now. You kneel beside the shelf of debates. These are collections of imagined dialogues, Man versus God, farmer versus storm, king versus time. One of the more poignant entries is a conversation between a fig tree and a stone wall. The tree brags about its fruit. The wall responds, "I will still be here when your roots dry." Philosophical burn. There's one particularly battered tablet near the back, part of a multi-volume epic titled The Life of Dust. You've only ever found 3 of its 20 parts. In one, a man gives up everything to chase silence. In another, he tries to write a tablet so perfect that it disappears. In the third, he forgets why he started. You relate more than you'd like to admit. You take a seat on one of the cushioned benches nearby. You used to host readings here. Quiet gatherings. A few trusted scribes. A few cups of date wine. And some light arguments over whether dreams were divine or just indigestion. Those nights were your favorites. No politics. No war. Just words. Just clay and thought. You lean back now, hands folded over your chest. Your eyes skim the shelves one last time, not searching, just remembering. You think of all the voices preserved here, not just yours, the humble, the proud, the strange, the wise. So many people trying to make sense of a world that never asked to be explained, and maybe that's why you kept writing too. Not to be remembered as a king or a hunter or a builder, but as someone who wondered, who listened, who laughed at riddles and whispered to shadows and left behind a few sentences in the dark. You stand slowly. The room seems quieter now, as if the tablets are nodding in agreement. You walk back toward the center of the library, where it all began. The stone lions still sit in their eternal vigil, unchanged. But you feel different, and you should, because you've walked through memory. Through thunder and letters and forgotten thumbprints. Through omens and riddles and stories only half finished. You've stood where gods once whispered and children once laughed. And you've survived all of it now.